The morning the caravan left, it was still dark. Dale Voss heard the wagons before he saw them, the groan of iron-banded wheels on packed earth, the low cursing of drivers who hadn't slept, the wet cough of draft animals pulling hard against the pre-dawn cold. He was already standing at the edge of the supply depot with a mug of something that had been called tea at some point in its existence, watching the Valdres merchant train assemble itself into a crooked line and begin its long crawl west toward the pass. They had 31 wagons. They were leaving with 30. He found her 40 minutes later. She was shackled to a supply post at the far end of the depot's eastern yard, behind a stack of crated grain that had been left behind because it was wet-rotted and worthless. She sat in the dirt with her back against the post, knees drawn up, head tipped sideways, unconscious, big even for an orc probably 5'10" standing, with shoulders built for carrying loads that would buckle a draft horse, and a mess of dark braids that had come half undone and fallen across her face. There was dried blood on her left temple, crusted dark over a wound that someone had bandaged badly and then stopped caring about. The shackle around her wrist was a transit chain, the kind used to secure valuable cargo during rough travel. Heavy iron. Someone had fixed it to the post with a secondary lock that required a key he didn't have. He stood there for a moment with his cooling tea. He was 3 days out from the end of his contract with the Valdres house. Technically, he was already done. His obligation to the caravan had been escort to this depot, not escort forward. He was supposed to collect his fee from the wagon master this morning, rest up 2 nights at the depot's attached inn, and then begin the 4-day walk south to Kessarn, where there was a garrison posting and a bed with his name on it. He had 38 silver on him. He had a kit bag, a short sword, a field crossbow with 20 bolts, and 4 days of hardtack. He crouched down and looked at her. She had a brand on the inside of her right forearm. Not a slave brand, he'd seen enough of those to know the difference. This was a clan mark, deep and deliberate, a pattern of interlocking hook shapes that he associated distantly with the Eastern Range clans. The Vreth. He knew that name, the way you know the name of a river that floods, something to be aware of when it's behind you. Her breathing was steady. The wound on her head wasn't fresh enough to be the thing that was going to kill her, but it wasn't old enough to be something he could stop worrying about either. He looked west, toward the dust the caravan had already raised against the lightning sky. Then he set down his mug, opened his kit bag, and started looking for his pick set. It took him 11 minutes to get the secondary lock open. He caught her when she started to tilt sideways, which woke her, which immediately put a hand the size of a small saddle around his throat. He held very still. Her eyes, amber, shot through with something darker at the center, the color of old resin, focused on him with a sharpness that was completely at odds with how long she'd been unconscious. Orcs did that. They came back from the edge fast, like a body that had been holding its breath finally deciding to breathe. He said very quietly, "I'm not with the caravan." She looked at him for 4 more seconds. Then she let go. He sat back on his heels and rubbed his throat. "You speak common." "Some," she said. Her voice was low and rough, and she said the word like it cost something. "Good, my name's Dale. I'm going east. You're welcome to travel with me if you can walk. If you can't walk, I'll carry what I can and leave you what I can, and someone will come through eventually." He paused. "The caravan didn't come back for you." "I know," she said. "I'm not going to ask why." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something assessing in it, not hostile, just the particular kind of careful calculation that people do when they are trying to figure out if a situation is a trap or a gift or something in between. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself, in a handful of places he didn't particularly enjoy remembering. "Grucka," she said. "Is that your name?" "Yes." "All right." He stood up and held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she took it and he helped her stand. She was heavy, not in a labored way, just densely, structurally heavy, the way old stone is heavy. and she used his offered arm with a matter-of-fact economy that told him she wasn't embarrassed by needing it, just aware of needing it, which was a distinction he respected. She stood and tested her weight and said nothing. "East it is," he said. He picked up his mug, set it on top of the rotted grain crate, and they walked. He started keeping notes on the second night. It wasn't something he'd planned. He had a battered field journal that he'd used for supply tallies and route notes during the escort job. Half the pages were already filled with inventory lists and sketch maps that were now useless. But he turned to a clean page that night and wrote down what had happened at the third hour after midnight, and made himself describe it precisely, without the cushioning that the mind reaches for automatically when something unsettles it. She had spoken in her sleep, not common, not the low, guttural working language that Orcs used with other races in the borderlands. This was something older and more structured, with long vowel sounds and a particular clicking consonant that he found he could not reproduce, and it had gone on for almost 4 minutes before she went quiet again. He had been sitting watch. They'd agreed to split the night into 2 shifts, and he had watched her sleep through all of it, and at the end of it he had found himself sitting very still with his crossbow across his knees, not because he was frightened of her, but because something in the quality of the words had gone through him like a key turning in a lock. Not her words, the sound of someone else speaking through her. He wrote third hour, second night. She speaks in sleep, not common, not trade tongue. Old Vreth dialect, I think, continuous patterned, does not wake. Duration approx 4 minutes. No physical agitation. Eyes partially open, showing white at lower rim. Breathing elevated but not labored. Returns to normal sleep state without intervention. He paused. Added she did not know in the morning. I did not tell her. He thought about that for a moment and then crossed out the last sentence and replaced it with, I need to tell her. In the morning he did. She listened without interrupting, sitting on a stone at the edge of their small fire with a piece of dried meat in one hand and the expression of someone receiving information they had been waiting for. Not surprised, not afraid, something that was closer to resigned or perhaps confirmed. How long, she asked. I don't know, I didn't hear it before last night. Before is probably also. She ate a piece of the dried meat. The caravan, the reason they left me. She said it flatly, without self-pity, just as a piece of data being submitted for consideration. He said, what happens during it? She was quiet for a moment. There is a thing that says it is inside me, she said, in the careful, constructed way she spoke common when she was being precise. My grandmother had a word for it. I do not have that word in your language. It is like a voice that is not your voice. That knows things your body knows, but your mind does not. She turned the dried meat over in her fingers. It is not a spirit. It is not madness. It is old. My blood is full of old things. Is it dangerous? She met his eyes. To me or to you? Either. To you, she said, it has not been yet. To me, she paused. It has not made me hurt myself. It has made the people around me afraid. She glanced away toward the east. Afraid people do things like shackle you to posts. He thought about this. What does your grandmother's word mean in your language? The closest meaning you can give me. She was quiet for a long moment, working through it. The one who remembers when you cannot, she said finally. He wrote that down when she wasn't watching. They fell into a rhythm over the next 4 days that he found, to his vague surprise, entirely workable. She was a better navigator than he was in the open ground east of the depot. She read the terrain the way some people read text, with a quiet fluency that translated into decisions about path and shelter that he could tell, after the fact, had been right before he'd understood why they were right. She didn't explain her choices unless asked. When he asked, she explained simply and without condescension. He learned quickly not to offer the explanation she hadn't asked for in return, because she didn't need it, and he did not enjoy the patient way she waited for him to finish. She slept each night, in a position he came to think of as the sentinel's rest, not fully loose, not fully ready, somewhere between. The way veterans sleep when they have spent enough years in places where being caught fully asleep is a failure you only make once. Her braids, mostly redone now with systematic care each morning, came partially undone each night, and she redid them each morning with the same systematic care. And he noticed after the third day that the pattern she braided them into was different from the one she'd woken up with. And then he noticed that the pattern changed every morning, and then he filed that away and didn't comment on it. The episodes came again on the fourth night and the sixth night. Both times he sat watch and kept notes. He had developed by then a system. He'd written the phonetic shapes of the sounds he heard, as best he could render them in common letters, and he'd begun to notice patterns, repetitions, particular sequences that came back reliably. On the seventh morning he showed her the notebook. She looked at the phonetic transcriptions for a long time. "You can hear the words," she said. "I can't understand them, but I can hear the patterns. These three," she pointed to a sequence he had marked with a bracket. "These come before it wakes, every time. Every time I've heard it, yes. They're the opening, I think, some kind of formal address." She looked at him, not the assessing look from the first morning, something more complex. "No one has ever done this," she said. "Written it down. Paid attention." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He closed the notebook and put it away. On the ninth day, the terrain changed. The open ground east of the depot narrowed into a broken hill country, loose shale, sparse tree cover, the kind of landscape that provides abundant ambush points and very limited escape routes. Grucka slowed their pace and began scanning the ridgelines in a way that she hadn't on the open ground, and he matched her pace and her attention without asking why, because he'd been doing this long enough to know that when someone who knows the terrain starts watching the high ground, the appropriate response is to watch the high ground. He saw the first trace of them at midday, a fire mark on a rock face, not recent, 3 days old at least, but the shape of it was purposeful. He pointed it out. She looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "Vreth scouting sign," she said. "Your clan." "My former clan." She said it without particular weight, but he heard what lived underneath it. "They're tracking you." "They have been tracking me since before the caravan depot," she said. "I thought distance would thin the trail. It has not thinned enough." He turned this over. "The caravan, they didn't leave you because of the episodes." "No." She looked at him with something that might have been, on another face, apology. "The merchant lord knew that the Vreth would eventually find me. He calculated that the cost of my presence exceeded my value. He was not wrong by his accounting." She paused. "I did not tell you this before because I wanted the distance to be enough." "How many?" "A scouting unit is 7. A war pack is 28. She studied the fire mark again. "This is scouting sign. They have not called the pack yet, but when they find my location fixed, they will call it." He was quiet for a moment. "What do they want with you?" She was quiet for longer. "What they want," she said slowly, "is the thing inside me." He thought about that, the one who remembers. "Yes." "They want it back, or they want it gone." She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, something in her face cracked, just briefly, just slightly, and what came through was not fear exactly, but a very old and very private exhaustion. "There is a ceremony," she said, "to take it out. It is," she stopped. "It does not leave the vessel undamaged." He understood. He took the fire marks bearing on his sketch map and marked the date. "We're not going to be caught fixed," he said. "We keep moving." She looked at him. The crack was gone or had been put away. "You could still go south," she said. "Kesarn is 3 days. I have made your road longer." "You have," he agreed. She waited. "I don't particularly want to go south," he said. "I've been to Kesarn. The posting is fine and the bed is fine, and fine is I've had fine." He adjusted the kit bag. "Let's go." He found, on the 10th night, that he had begun to understand some of the words. He was sitting watch again, and she was in the early phases of sleep, and the speech began, the familiar formal opening, the sequence of 3 that preceded it, the shift in her breathing, and he was already writing it down when he heard, or thought he heard among the older patterned sounds, something that resolved. Not a common word, but a meaning. A shape that landed in him not as sound but as sense. The way a phrase in a foreign language sometimes passes through translation and arrives as pure understanding before you can account for how it got there. He wrote 5th episode, opening sequence confirmed, second passage new, there is a word that I believe means danger, followed by a direction, I think something like east or back or behind. Pattern repeats 4 times. Strong emphasis on the first syllable of the direction word each repetition. He paused, staring at the page. Then he wrote, it is warning her, or warning me. He sat with that for a long time, watching the firelight play across her face. She was still and calm in sleep the way she rarely was awake. There was always a watchfulness in her when she was conscious, a small tightness at the corners of her eyes that only went out when she slept. Which was, he thought, somewhat ironic given what was waiting for her there. He thought about what she'd said, pays attention, and before that, no one has ever. He thought about the scouting sign on the rock face and what 7 Vreth scouts meant, and what came after 7 Vreth scouts. He did not sleep during his watch. In the morning, he showed her the new notation and told her what he thought it meant. She went very still. She took the notebook from him and looked at the transcription for a long time. You hear it speaking, she said, not a question. I hear it trying to speak to me, he said. I don't think it's getting through on purpose. I think I've been listening long enough that I started picking up the signal. He paused. I think it was trying to tell me something last night, about what's behind us. She looked up from the notebook. It has never, she stopped, started again. It does not speak to the outside. It has never spoken to the outside. Only inside me. Maybe, he said carefully. It's had things to say before and no one was listening. She held the notebook for another long moment. Then she handed it back to him, and she stood, and she looked east the way she always looked east in the mornings, something habitual in it, some need to confirm that east was still where it had been. We need to go faster, she said. I know. They went faster. The scouts found them on the 12th day. It happened at dusk, in the broken shale country, in the last reasonable hour of light before the terrain became treacherous in the dark. He heard the sound of displaced stone from the left ridge, deliberate, he thought, a warning rather than an accident, and then there were 3 of them visible on the high ground, not moving, just present. Full Vreth war kit. Face bands and the deep ochre pigment they used on armor plates. They were built like Grucka, the same structural density, but there were differences he catalogued quickly. Older, all 3, and carrying the long-hafted weapons he associated with Eastern Range war roles. They had not drawn anything, they were simply visible. He said quietly without turning his head, 3 on the left ridge, more I can't see. 4 on the right, Grucka said. Her voice was perfectly even. They have been flanking since the last water stop. What do they want to do right now? They want to see if I will come. Will you? A pause that went a little too long. He looked at her. Her hands were at her sides. Her eyes were aimed at the ridge, but there was something wrong with the focus, too far, too inside. He'd seen that look once before on the second morning when he'd told her about the episodes, and she'd had that look of something confirmed. Grucka, he said. She blinked, came back. No, she said, I will not come. Good, he kept his voice level. Is this the part where they charge, or is this the part where someone talks? Someone talks, she said, for a little while. The talks lasted approximately 40 seconds. The war pack came down off both ridges at once, and what had been 7 was now closer to 20, which meant the full pack had been called before the scouts had found them, and the scouting sign had been a known trail, not a searching one. They had been herded. He had the crossbow up and had put a bolt through the shoulder of the closest one before the charge reached them, not a killing shot, but a stopping one, and it stopped the forward edge long enough for Grucka to move, which was when he saw, for the first time, what Grucka was when she was not rationing herself. She was very fast, much faster than her size should have allowed, and the speed wasn't the raw mechanical kind, wasn't just muscle. It was the reading terrain kind, the same fluency she used navigating, and it meant that she moved through the pack not in a straight line but in a series of exact angles, each one using the momentum of the one before it. And she hit 3 of them before they had adjusted from the crossbow bolt and laid 2 of them down, and the third found himself in a position he couldn't recover from and made the decision to stay down voluntarily. All of this took about 4 seconds. But there were still 17 of them upright and coming. He had reloaded and was selecting a second target when the change came over her. He had been prepared for it, in the way you can be prepared for a thing you've only read about. He had written down the 3 opening sounds. He had written the direction word and the emphasis pattern. He had paid attention. And so when her breathing changed, not the labored change of a fighter losing ground, but the deep, involuntary change of someone going under, he recognized it for what it was, and he did not panic. He watched. The pack had recognized it too. They stopped. Not because she had stopped, she was still standing, still exactly where she had been, but because of what was happening to her posture. The war kit she carried sat differently on her. Her face was the same face, but the expression was not an expression she had worn in his presence, and the amber of her eyes had gone to something older and more bronze, and the quality of the attention in them was not the careful, assessing attention of Grucka at her most watchful, but something that predated attention as a word he had the tools to define. The pack's forward leader, the oldest of them, with clan braids that reached his belt, said something to her in Vreth. She answered in Vreth. What came out of her was not her voice, not in register, not in tempo. He heard in the answer the opening sequence, the 3 formal sounds, and then after it the direction word, and then a pattern that he had never heard in the episodes but that he recognized in his bones the way you recognize a door being shut or a weight being set down. Finality. Verdict. The pack leader said something else, shorter, harder. She answered again, and this time he heard, among the old pattern sounds, something unmistakably new. His name. Rendered as it would be rendered by someone who did not speak common, clipped at the consonants and extended at the vowel, but his name. The forward leader looked at him. He held the crossbow steady and looked back. The pack leader said, in accented but serviceable common, "She says you can hear the old voice." "I've been paying attention," Dale said. "The old voice does not speak to outsiders." It did last night. He kept his eyes on the leader but his peripheral attention on the 17 who were still standing. "It told me you were coming. It told me direction and urgency, and it repeated itself 4 times, which I interpreted as emphasis." He paused. "I think it was trying to make sure I understood. I think it's been trying to make sure someone understood for a long time." There was a stillness in the pack that he could not have named but that he recognized as significant, not hesitation, something older than hesitation. The particular quality of attention that comes when something expected has shifted into something unanticipated. The pack leader said something to the others in Vreth, not a command but a question. Answers came back, low and short. He looked at the thing that was inhabiting Grucka's posture and said something that had the shape of a formal address, respectful, even in the way that you are respectful towards something that has the capacity to be very, very difficult about being disrespected. The thing that wore Grucka's face answered. Long, complex, the direction word again, but this time without urgency, and something that in the patterns he had been mapping for 12 days in a small battered notebook had the formal structure of a conclusion. Then Grucka came back. It was like watching a window clear after breath has fogged it. The bronze went out of her eyes, the amber returned, and the expression that settled onto her face was exhausted in a way he had not seen before, not the general exhaustion of hard travel, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for so long that setting it down felt like losing a limb. She stood in the middle of the pack, and for a moment she looked very young. The pack leader lowered his weapon. Behind him, the others followed. Dale did not lower the crossbow. "What did it say?" he asked. The pack leader looked at him steadily. "It said the vessel has chosen her path, that it came to the Eastern Range clans in a time of need, and it will leave in a time of choosing. It has not chosen to go with us. What happens if you take her anyway, for the ceremony?" The old voice has said, "The ceremony kills the voice first, then the vessel." He paused. "We did not know this before. No one has spoken with the old voice while it was awake, only after." He looked at Grucka. "The ceremony was designed for what we thought it was. It was not designed for what it is." Dale looked at Grucka. She was watching him. "Is that true?" he asked. "I have always known," she said, "that the ceremony would end me. I did not know until now that the voice knew this also, that it had reasons for staying." She was quiet for a moment. "I did not know it was staying to protect me." He lowered the crossbow, not all the way, halfway. "So what happens now?" he said to the pack leader. The pack leader said something in Vreth. Several of the others moved to assist the two Grucka had laid down, who were alive and conscious, but disinclined to get up without help. The leader looked at Dale with an expression that was, he thought, the Vreth equivalent of reluctant professional respect. "You listened to the old voice," the pack leader said. "For 12 days in the dark you wrote down what it said." "I did." "Why?" He thought about this. "Because she needed someone to pay attention," he said, "and because it seemed like it had something to say." The pack leader regarded him for a moment longer. Then he said, "The Vreth do not follow humans. But we remember what humans do." He turned to the pack and said something short and final in Vreth, and then they began moving back toward the ridges, helping their wounded among them, unhurried. The last one over the ridge was the pack leader. He paused at the top and looked back at them, both of them, with an expression that Dale associated later with the way very experienced soldiers look at things they expect to have opinions about in 30 years. Then he was gone. They stood in the shale for a moment without speaking. The light was going. The ridges were empty. Somewhere to the southeast, a night bird had begun its call, which was the first thing that had happened in the last 12 minutes that felt like normal. Grucka sat down on a flat rock. Not because she was injured, she wasn't, beyond a split in the knuckles of her left hand that she seemed to have noticed, but decided not to care about yet. She sat down because sitting down was the appropriate physical response to what had just happened, and Grucka was, he'd found, unerringly calibrated to appropriate physical responses. He sat down on the rock beside her. "You knew the ceremony would kill you," he said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since I was 15, she said. "My grandmother told me. She had the same voice, and she told me what the ceremony was, and she told me," she said. She paused, and he could see her selecting the words carefully from 2 languages, building the sentence the way you build something you need to last. She said, "Find the one who listens in the dark, not the one who is not afraid. Everyone is afraid. Find the one who listens anyway." He didn't say anything. "I did not know," she continued, "whether that was a piece of wisdom or a very old poem or something she made up because it sounded better than 'you will be shackled to a post and left behind while people run from what lives in you.' But she was a person who said things that held later when you needed them to." She looked at her hands. She was right about the listening. He thought about 12 nights of notes in a battered journal. He thought about the 3 formal opening sounds and the direction word and the name that had come out of a voice he didn't have the language for, aimed at him precisely and exactly because There was one person in the available space who had been making the specific effort of paying attention. "It gave me your name," he said. "Yes." "In the middle of a war pack, to the person who leads it." "Yes." "As evidence." "Yes." She looked at him sideways. "You do not seem to find this unusual." "I find it unusual. I'm just trying to work out if I'm offended that it used me without asking." She made a sound that he recognized with a slight delay as a laugh. Not a large one. A small one, dry and surprised, as if it had come out before she'd made the decision to allow it. "It did not ask me either," she said. "For 15 years it did not ask me. And now—" She was quiet. Out on the broken shale, the night bird called again, closer. "It is still there," she said. "It will be there until I am not there. My grandmother died with it." She paused. "But it was trying to help. It has always been trying to help. I did not know. None of us knew." She turned to look at him fully, and her eyes in the dying light were the color of amber, just her. "You wrote down what it said for 12 nights, in the dark." "I had a notebook and nothing better to do." "You are lying." "I'm a little bit lying," he agreed. She said something in Vreth, not the old voice. Her voice, her particular accent and register, the careful common speaker's Vreth, slow and deliberate. Something short. "What was that?" he asked. "The formal phrase," she said, "for there is not an exact common word. It means something like 'I see you,' as a complete thing, not only the part that is useful to me." She looked away again, east, the habitual morning look displaced into evening. "My grandmother said it also had no common word." He sat with that for a moment. "Kesarn still has a bed with my name on it," he said. "Yes." "The posting is fine." "You said." "I also said I've had fine." She waited. "The Eastern Range," he said, "past the hill country." "What's there?" She was quiet for a moment, and he could see her working through it, not the language, not the translation, but the question underneath the question. "Difficult terrain," she said. "Harder winters than here. People who remember old things and are not always afraid of them." She paused. "A place where someone who listens in the dark would not go to waste." He stood up, adjusted the kit bag. "Can you walk tonight? We should put distance between us and the pack before they rethink." "They will not rethink." She stood also and tested her weight and pulled her braids back with the efficient motions of someone used to resetting after hard things. The old voice spoke formally to the pack leader. "That is binding by Vreth custom. It spoke formally to you also." "That is more binding." "More binding how?" She considered. "It told the pack that you were the witness, that you had recorded the voice's words and the pack's actions." She looked at him steadily. "Among the Eastern Range clans, the one who witnesses and records is protected, permanently, by custom that is older than the clan structure itself, older than the voice." She paused. "My grandmother would say that the voice planned this. I would say that the voice is old enough to know how things work." He stared at her. "So I am now formally protected by an Orc war clan," he said slowly, "because a spirit that lives in your blood used my notebook as a legal document." "Yes." "Without asking me." "It gave you your name back," she said. "In the middle of the pack, in front of the leader, it named you specifically. In Vreth formal speech, naming it is not small. It is," she tilted her head, looking for it. "It is saying, this one is real, this one matters, this one should be remembered." He was quiet for a moment. The night bird had gone silent. The first stars were becoming visible above the eastern ridgeline. "Your grandmother," he said, "she died with the voice still in her." "Yes." Was she all right at the end, with that?" Grucka was quiet for a long time, not avoiding the question, working toward an honest answer the way she always worked, with care, without shortcuts. "She said," Grucka told him finally, "that the voice was not a burden, it was a companion. That it remembered things she could not remember and warned her of things she could not see and named people as real when the world had forgotten they were." She paused. She said, "Some things that look like afflictions are just old help. That doesn't know it's allowed to stop." He thought about that for a long moment. He thought about the battered notebook in his kit bag, the 37 pages of phonetic transcriptions and pattern notes, and a crossed-out sentence that he'd replaced with "I need to tell her asterisk." He thought about 12 nights of choosing to pay attention when it would have been much more comfortable not to. He thought about what his grandmother had called the particular human stubbornness of refusing to stop listening when everything around you has decided the listening is pointless. "East," he said. "East," she said. And they walked into the dark, the man with his notebook and the woman with her old companion, and the stars came out one by one above the hard country, and none of it was fine, and all of it was exactly enough. He wrote one more entry that night, by the light of a small, careful fire in a hollow in the shale, while she slept her sentinel's rest nearby with her braids half undone, and the night quiet around them. 12th night, no episode, first night without one since the second. He paused. The voice knew we were going to be all right before we did. It stopped warning once the situation resolved. I think that is what it always was. Not a haunting, not a possession, just something very old that had learned over a very long time that the world tends to abandon the people it doesn't understand, and so it built itself into the architecture of the ones who needed protecting, and it waited for someone to listen. Humans, my old sergeant used to say, are the species that stayed too long at every place they ever left. That couldn't walk away from a thing once they'd decided it mattered. I'm starting to think that's not a failing. He closed the notebook. He put it back in the kit bag. He sat watch until her breathing settled into the deep, slow rhythm of genuine rest, and then he sat watch a little longer, because the stars were out and the terrain was clear, and there was no particular reason to stop. East was still east in the morning. It would still be east when they reached it. That was enough.